Have you ever bought a massive, complicated box of Legos? You look at that gorgeous picture on the front of the box and you're just like, wow, that looks incredible. I absolutely want that. But then you tip the box over, dump all the pieces onto the table, and suddenly you're just staring at this chaotic, terrifyingly scattered mess. Well, building a business feels exactly like that. We constantly see the front of the box, the highly successful founders flexing on Instagram, but the actual reality, it looks like a terrifying leap into overwhelming chaos. But here's the secret. There are instructions. If you just follow the step-by-step instructions, piecing it together block by block, you really can build exactly what's on the front of that box. Welcome to today's Explainer. I am super thrilled to guide you through this material today because we are going to completely demystify that intimidating leap of faith we call entrepreneurship. We're going to take that scattered, overwhelming pile of business advice and transform it into a highly structured, totally manageable process. You seriously don't have to be a born genius to build wealth. You really just need the right blueprint. Okay, let's dive into this. Our instruction manual for today is broken down into 6 key sections: the 2 pillars of wealth, attitude, effort, and mindset, the validation hack method, asking what would it take, the 70-30 transition rule, and finally, focus, signal versus noise. Let's start assembling. All right, section 1, the 2 pillars of wealth. Build and scale. Look, if you aren't financially where you want to be right now, the sources for this explainer suggest you just need to tune out all the extra noise and focus exclusively on 2 foundational pillars. First up, build a personal brand. And no, you absolutely do not need millions of fans to make this work. If you have just 5,000 to 50,000 followers in a high-value niche, you're already seen as a key person of influence. That alone is enough of an audience to generate 7 figures. The second pillar? Attaching that brand to an elegant, scalable business model. Basically, this means building something that lets you communicate your value and sell to literally anyone in the world. Personal brand plus a scalable business, that is your ultimate destination. Now, what's really fascinating here is the sequencing of how you actually get there. Business growth happens in 5 very distinct phases, but most people get terribly stuck in phase 2, perseverance. This is that pre-profit stage where you're wearing every single hat, putting out daily fires, and just feeling completely exhausted. Founders get trapped here on this treadmill of chaos because they try to scale way too early. They take what little revenue they have and misallocate it before the business is even truly viable in phase 3. Remember this. You have to conquer viability before you can ever achieve true growth. Moving right along to section 2, attitude, effort, and mindset. Move fast, put in effort. The winning mindset really boils down to this fantastic quote from successful entrepreneur Bill Perkins. He says, "I am not smarter than anybody else or richer than anybody else. I just move faster than anybody else." The wealthiest founders aren't necessarily the smartest people in the room. They just utilize speed. By the time someone else is sitting around pondering a business idea or formatting a 10-page business plan, the great founders have already made a move, made 3 mistakes, and found a significantly better way to do it. Speed, trial and error will beat raw, overanalyzed intelligence every single time. The source material highlights this as the immigrant mentality. It all comes down to the 2 things you actually completely control: 100% attitude and 100% effort. There's this brilliant story in the source about a waitress named Sharon. She worked serving breakfast at an incredibly average, let's just call it an okay Western hotel. But she treated her job like she was serving at the 5-star 4 Seasons. She was acting like a founder. Why? Because while she couldn't control the hotel itself, she had absolute control over her own attitude and her effort. That right there is the exact mentality that builds empires. Which brings us to section 3, the validation hack method. Test ideas cheaply. Let's look at a super practical example from the source material. A college student came up with this grand idea, a peer-to-peer clothing sharing platform. The concept was that college kids have tons of clothes they never wear, right? So they could post them online and just borrow from each other. And man, she was completely in love with this idea. Because she was so in love with it, her plan was equally massive. She wanted to drop out of college, raise $5 million, and hire a whole team of software coders to build out this massive platform. Now, here's the crucial point. Falling in love with a totally untested idea is literally the single worst mistake an entrepreneur can make. It just leads to massive, entirely unnecessary risk. But instead of dropping out, she was taught the validation hack. She was told to just take a piece of paper, a marker, and a piece of tape. She wrote, "Would you like to borrow my clothes? Knock," and simply taped it to her dorm room door. The whole goal was to see if anyone would actually knock within 24 hours. Because if no one knocks, you just saved yourself $5 million and a college degree.
And that is the definition of a validation hack. It's doing something completely unscalable and manual just to test reality. With that little sign on the door, she could manually test if people even liked her style, she could test if the clothes would fit, and she could see how she actually felt when her favorite shirt came back with a giant stain on it. She could learn her customer acquisition costs and logistics without writing a single line of code. You absolutely must quickly, cheaply, and easily collide your idea with real people. All right, moving to section 4, asking what would it take? Execution at scale.
So the sources suggest playing a really interesting game called What Would It Actually Take? Think about it. Most of us immediately jump into problem mode, right? We start listing the 152 reasons why a big goal won't work. The trick here is to force yourself into solution mode. If your goal is to build a studio as big as Disney, you sit down and honestly ask, no matter how outrageous it sounds, what actually needs to be true for this to work? You have to stop asking if it's possible and start identifying the actual price tag of success. The founders of Quest Nutrition used this exact framework. Before they even started, they sat down and wrote out a literal, brutal laundry list of sacrifices required to succeed. It meant putting their houses on the line. It meant taking a massive 1/3 pay cut. It meant absolutely zero vacations. But because they laid it all out, there were zero surprises. When times got incredibly hard, and they always do, no one panicked because they had already established exactly what they were willing to sacrifice to build their dream. Let's pivot to section 5, the 70-30 transition rule. When to quit your job. A lot of people ask when it's safe to jump ship. The answer is 30%. The 70-30 rule dictates that you should absolutely keep your day job while building your side hustle. You work your regular job, and on nights, weekends, and lunch breaks, using maybe 10 to 15% of your total time, you build the new business. Once that new business consistently generates 30% of your total income, you know you actually have something viable. That right there is the mathematical green light that it is finally safe to go all in. This 70-30 rule directly ties into the concept of your financial runway. Keeping your day job and ruthlessly minimizing your expenses is how you extend that runway. When you limit your cash drain and completely avoid debt, you're basically giving your metaphorical airplane way more time to gather speed before it needs to lift off. Limit the financial pressure on yourself so you actually have the freedom to figure things out. And finally, section 6, focus, signal versus noise, relentless clarity. The sources pull a super fascinating lesson from Steve Jobs back in the early 90s. He believed in this ruthless 80-20 ratio of signal to noise. To him, the signal wasn't some grand, sweeping 5-year vision. No, the signal was simply the top 3 to 5 critical things that absolutely positively had to be accomplished in the next 18 hours he was awake. Everything else that distracted from that immediate daily execution, that was just noise to be totally ignored. Now, as your business scales, you need actual rules to maintain that level of focus across a team. The tech company Ariba used this incredible framework, direct and honest truth at all times. They fostered safe brainstorming by declaring no bad ideas, but here's the genius part. They specifically encouraged mocking the CEO's ideas just to prove the environment was truly safe to speak up in. They ruthlessly raised their standards, letting go of anyone who couldn't keep up. And most importantly, they made it noble to check your ego at the door and hire people who were far smarter and better than you. So to bring this whole thing together, building a business really does not have to be a blind, risky leap of faith. Think about commercial airplanes for a second. 100 years ago, flying was incredibly dangerous. Today, we don't even think twice about getting on a plane. Why is that? Because engineers figured out the aerodynamic principles and created a strict, repeatable process. When you follow the proven principles of entrepreneurship, when you validate safely, measure your runway, and relentlessly focus on the signal, it becomes a highly systematic, structured way to build the exact life you want. Which leaves us with this final, crucial thought. So many of us are stuck overthinking, completely paralyzed by analysis, just waiting around for the perfect moment or the perfect business plan. But as we've explored in this explainer today, speed and effort are what matter most. So I want you to look at your calendar right now. What is one tiny, absolutely practical step you can take today? Can you make that phone call? Can you literally tape a piece of paper to a door to test an idea? Stop overthinking the messy pile of Legos on the table. Just pick up one single block today and snap it into place. I hope you enjoyed this explainer, and I seriously cannot wait to see what you build.